Hello, dear listeners. I think you know that February is Black History Month, and here with us today on You Are What You Read is Professor of African American Literature and Dean of the Graduate School at Howard University. Please help me welcome Dr. Dana A. Williams. Dana joins us for a conversation about her book, Toni at Random, the iconic writer's legendary editorship, a biography about the great Toni Morrison and the lesser-known details of her work as a writer and an editor. Today, February 18th, is Toni Morrison's birthday, and we are thrilled to pay tribute to her in this episode and always. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dana A. Williams. You tell the story of Toni Morrison from her youth pretty much to the end of her career. And I almost think it's a treatise on use every talent you have when you're a writer, including your ability to edit. Now, so let's start there.
I don't know that I thought about it that way. So I appreciate the framing that you have to use every talent that you have. That's a responsibility. And to be a writer, to be a thinker, to be a culture worker, to be an editor, like whatever you have, bring it all in so that the good writing that is possible to make good reading is accessible and available to everyone.
The inciting incident of this book is when you very carefully lay the bricks. And one of the first bricks you lay is that she was sort of weary of the idea that culturally that the American Black person was connected to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to say, hey, the story starts now where the story starts. She's the most modern character that I can discern in literature because she's born in 1931, so if we start to do the math, she comes of age in a time, 1960, whatever that would be, 31, 41, 50, yeah, it's 1965 when the Voting Rights Act went through. Now I'm skipping over Jim Crow, but that was not going to define her, any of that. She was going to emerge with a Black voice that she felt was contemporary, fresh, and in the moment. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, the skepticism around everything that was an accepted notion. She questioned. If
Mm-hmm,
everybody
mm-hmm,
just assumed that we all agree that fill in the blank, she's like, do we all agree about that? And if we do, what are the implications of agreeing? Well, what do
mm-hmm.
we do with the people who don't agree? And that really shows itself up at first in The Bluest Eye, her first novel, where the question that she's asking is, what do we do with the people who didn't get the memo that Black was beautiful? What about Pecola, who is Black but still wants blue eyes because she doesn't completely buy the 1960s notion where we just all accept this kind of aesthetic beauty and this valuing? What are the consequences for that because the damage is real and has been done? So I think that kind of questioning of all things was there. And conversely, she questioned everything about American literature. She questioned everything about what should be canonical and what should not be. I mentioned in the book that her master's thesis does that. Now, we've come to think about Virginia Woolf and William Faulkner and people that she was writing about and thinking about, Jean Toomer's Cane. Um, we think of them now in a modern sense is like, oh, everybody knows fill in the blank. And at the time, people weren't really writing about Virginia Woolf. She was too quote unquote new because it takes the Literary Academy a very long time to decide
To
that.
catch up. To catch up.
So she was always pushing the edge. And I think the most provocative one is when she begins to talk about Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And she says, invisible to whom? Like, I was never invisible. Who thought that somebody Black was invisible. So she was always really pushing around the edges of a thing to say there are multiple ways of thinking. And I think we see that tremendously in the editorship, because she then begins to pursue writers who have that same kind of curiosity and who
To
are willing to probe.
to explain or to set the altar of what Toni at Random is about is Toni Morrison. A lot of people don't know that she was a great editor,
Yeah.
but she, in fact, built the highway. She did with her taste and her ability to select authors. We're going to get into some of them. But you just mentioned Dr. Williams, this Ralph Ellison. You also, that she didn't connect to that. Well, she challenged the Black male writer in a way I don't think anyone else could or did. Their assumptions about culture and life. And she also would agree and be supportive of, but there was also a sense that she didn't want to be defined by their assumptions either
Right.
as an editor in the books that she purchased and edited.
Yeah, I think that's true. Part of her attraction to the first Black male novelist that she edited was the fact that it wasn't another book like the ones that we had begun to see,
Mm-hmm.
especially during the Black Arts movement. So she was really interested in the interior life of Black
Mm-hmm.
people, and a reader who could
Mm-hmm.
see himself or herself for themselves, like in a text. So there always had to be this space for the reader to enter and make decisions about what was. There was never this situation where there's this declarative, here's what you are to think. And so she's really pushing back against any of the literature that says this is what we all agree to think about together. And that's the same thing with John McCluskey, quite similar to Wesley Brown. So those
Mm-hmm.
male writers that she edits, she is really attracted to. Even the way that she describes McCluskey's book is, it was a beautiful, quiet book for its time. And that's like the post Black Arts movement, when there is still a lot of noise. And his book is really this notion of pursuing a song. The title, literally, look what they done to my song. And they go back and forth about what the title should be and what is representative of this journey that this really heady jazz man, the experiences that he has and how he comes to know himself. Everything, especially in the fiction for Morrison, is what interior interrogations can we get and what do we learn from them?
To understand the publishing industry is there are publishing houses, and the house will have a commitment to publishing a particular kind of
Mhm.
book. Okay.
Mhm.
And so from the beginning, Toni Morrison knew she was a writer. She was going to learn everything on the she wasn't going to stop writing. She was going to pull double duty, which women are very good at, and triple duty. She had two sons. She had her job at Random House as an editor, and what an editor does is acquire books for the house that they believe are culturally relevant. She's at Random House at this point, and they were very into that. It had to be culturally relevant. Didn't really care if it sold so much. They wanted to be in the business of culling the best writers. I'm going to read this from your book. I have to compliment you, Professor Williams, because you made the process of publishing fascinating.
Huh.
It's
Thank
it's
you.
a page turner. I
Yeah.
couldn't wait to see what was going to happen next. So here's from Toni's own words how she described the job of being an editor. Editing sometimes requires restricting, setting loose, or nailing down. Paragraphs, pages may need rewriting. Sentences, especially final or opening ones, may need to be deleted or recast. Incomplete images or thoughts may need expansion, development. Sometimes the point is buried or too worked up.
Mhm.
Other times the tone is off, the voice is wrong or unforthcoming, or so self regarding it distorts or misshapes the characters it wishes to display. In some manuscripts, traps are laid so the reader is sandbagged into focusing on the author's superior gifts or knowledge rather than the intimate reader personalized world fiction can summon.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that covers it, doesn't it?
I know. And the beauty with which she describes this is the job of the editor can only be done by a writer like that, right? That's beautiful. Yeah.
She also has a sense of an appreciation, and this is rare in editors that become authors. I been my experience or observations, which, however fleeting. But often an editor that's also a writer cares more about their own work than they care about the people they've signed in.
I think that's probably true, and we see that for sure as an exception. There were times when she promoted the books that she was editing as much as she promoted her own books. When Sula and Song of Solomon were out, she didn't miss an opportunity while she was out doing promotion for those to also promote the other writers because it's so important. Books sell themselves, yes, but writers sell books for the most part. A really good book.
Well, Dr. Williams, that used to be true.
Well, that's true. That's true. But for sure, we know when Gail Jones is writing and Gail Jones is
Mhm.
refusing to do any press, refusing to do any author events. And instead of saying, well, what do you want me to do? Because you, writer, have to sell this book. Instead, Toni Morrison says, all right, every time I go to talk about Sula, I'm talking about Corregidor and Eva's man. That's a selfless kind of editor who is willing to say, here's a writer of my caliber, much younger than I am, who I think you should read. So when, for instance, Sula's about to come out and she's invited to give a essentially an essay on like books that she must read because it's supposed to be promoting her, right, as writer, and she spends the whole time talking about Gail Jones.
That's so inspiring to me because that's what we're doing right here. But she's the mother of us all in this regard.
Yeah.
I want to point this out. This is beautifully written, and I think it says it's the crux, really, of what the book's about. Morrison imagined that fiction by Black authors could reflect the sophistication of Black culture in both style and content, and that it could speak directly to Black people in affirmative ways rather than as a response to whiteness.
Mhm.
Having Bambara on her author list helped clarify how Morrison could uniquely impact the tradition of African American literature after the Black Arts movement, which you just spoke about, Dr.
Mhm.
Williams. Recruiting Bambara to her in her early years as an editor was all the good fortune Toni Morrison needed to prove herself and to her fellow editors that she was up for the challenge of convincing others to join her cause.
Yeah. Yeah, we had seen um, really peaks and valleys of African American literature in mainstream publishing houses. But we were also at that moment on the decline of the Black Arts movement, which was really almost insular in the sense that more independent publishers, independent Black publishers at that, were publishing Black writers than mainstream. Mainstream was still pretty fixated on Ellison, Baldwin, Wright. Some Ann Petrie, Maya Angelou makes a breakthrough in 1970. Alice Childress. 70 is a watershed for Black women writers, but for the most part, it does need like a kind of door kick in, and Morrison is able to do that. And it happens that one of the first collections of short stories that she edited, Toni Cade, Bombard, and I think, yeah, I can't remember if she had added Bombard as her last name or if it was Toni Cade with Gorilla My Love. That book is nominated. It's long listed for the National
Mm-hmm.
Book
Mm-hmm.
Award. So almost immediately out the gate, Morrison is able to say, I know what I'm doing. Y'all think I'm a rookie or a novice at this because, of course, she had no experience in publishing in trade. She had come from L.W. Singer, which was a textbook company, but she had published The Bluest Eye and had just paid attention to what was happening in the industry and thought, I see a niche, I see a need, and I'm going to fill it.
I love this because this is the era of Gorilla My Love, Seabirds, The Salt Eaters, which was the short, right, the short story collection. Um, What I loved about this is it's about 1980.
Hmm.
She's on the cusp of being 50.
Yeah.
And I want the women that are listening to really hear this. If you look to Toni Morrison, she juggled everything that you're wrestling with right now, right? Raising children, family life, the office, and then her own work.
Hmm.
And she finally begins to say to herself, I just can't write around the edges of my life. Can you speak to that, Dr. Williams? I love that. When she finally went, I have some artistic needs here too. Could
Yeah.
I follow? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, part of it was, of course, she grew up like as a depression era child. So she was never convinced that like the money that she had in the bank was not going to be taken, that the stock market wasn't going to fall apart, that
Right,
like
right.
the bottom wasn't going to fall out. So a big part of it was, for as long as I can earn a check, I'm going to earn a check. She transitions slowly into part-time work at Random House, and she's able to do most of the editing at home. They have a lot of flexibility, and this is pre-COVID, right? So she's able to work from home for the most part and then work early in the morning on her own writing. And as you have noted, she didn't see any problem with saying, I'm going to grade papers, I'm going to write for myself for 3 hours. I'm going to make sure I get the kids to school and fed. Then I'm going to read these manuscripts that I know I have to edit. And then I'm going to read some manuscripts that I'm curious about. And finally, it wasn't still about the money, really. It finally took someone to say to her, you are a writer exclusively, because I think every writer feels that way to some degree, like you should be doing something else. I remember grading papers, and I would always have like a pencil behind my ear, not so much because I wanted to have it handy, but because I felt guilty about the leisure time that I had as an academic grading papers. I was like, I feel like I should be doing some manual labor. So I think that's part of what she was doing.
Mhm.
Also, like the intellectual work is hard for us to imagine as work. And in many instances, it's much harder than we give ourselves credit for. And finally, she says, I'm tired of riding around in cars and writing on napkins. Angela Davis has this wonderful comment in an interview with her where she says they're riding in from Toni Morrison's house, and they get to a stoplight, and Toni Morrison's writing down like a little stuff on a yellow pad. And then the red light turns green and they go a little bit further. And then she stops and she writes down a little bit more. And that turns out to be her writing Song of Solomon. At a certain point, she said, okay, I got to stop writing at red lights. You know, I really need to give myself the space, to trust that I have made it as a writer. Because as an editor, she also knows people have wonderful books that don't necessarily make any money, and they have the second book, but then there is that kind of post sophomore slump. So I think she had the confidence in herself as a writer from the beginning, but
Mhm.
it took a minute to say, I can provide for my children, provide them with every experience that I want them to have, provide them with every experience that I want to have. Because there's some fun moments in the book too, where she's writing to Barbara Chase Robeau. She's like, the next time you go to the Louis Vuitton store, I'm gonna need you to bring me that wallet. So she also needs money to take care of the lifestyle that she wants for herself and for her children.
But really, it's about that little story to me was about her exquisite taste.
Yeah,
I think this woman, Toni Morrison, in every way, first of all, she was a great beauty, but she loved beautiful
things.
things
Yeah,
of this world. But more than that, craftsmanship,
that's right.
right?
That's
So
right.
it wasn't about any old wallet will do. It's not about that. It's about I like these the way the French. I like the way the French make a wallet. Be honest, you know. Now this captured my imagination when I read this, and for the listener, I just want you to know that Dr. Williams, you're in safe hands here. The river upon which this runs really is the story of Toni Morrison as an editor. And then woven in as she wrote her novels, her giant hit novels of international stature, that's woven in there. But mainly, you focus on her work as an editor and what that meant to her writing work.
Hmm.
So there's an author named Leon Forrest, And Toni insisted that she became a better writer
Hmm.
because she edited him. Can you talk about him a little bit, Dr. Williams?
Yeah, I mean, Leon Forrest was so steeped in culture that I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he's one of the finest writers of Black experience that we've ever seen. It's not as accessible as some of the things that were coming out at the same time that he was writing, but they also like the craft and the beauty and the artsmanship like there we don't see in other places. He was born in Chicago, had the kind of quintessential religious experience of both having people who are both Catholic and Baptist, having worked for Muhammad Speaks. So he also had that kind of potpourri of the Nation of Islam there. In had been in the army, had worked at a bar. I mean, he was like the quintessential everyman in the sense that he had experiences everywhere, and he could bring those to bear in his writing and could bring in historical facts and show the relationship between those historical facts and something that was happening more contemporarily. Um, had beautiful women characters, beautiful characters who we saw grow up. Just the overall kind of experience of a writer who influences an editor who is also a writer. So she was clear. Once I read Leon Forrest and a Leon Forrest sermon, I knew where to go if I was trying to get
Mm-hmm.
the language of a sermon right. So it did indeed, I think, influence her thinking and gave her, I think, the space to do some experimental things that
Mm-hmm.
she might not have otherwise dared to do until she figured out how to make them work with other writers. Yeah.
What you unlocked in me as a reader is don't do what she did. Do you do
Yeah.
what you do
Yeah.
to the best way you can do it,
Yep.
and find your path in what you're great at, but also have a sense of humor about it. So you chronicle the publication of Creole Feast. And this is another thing I love about your writing, because you give us like we get the historical context is there, the players in there, the writers that she dealt with on every level. Um, this book is a must. I think it's going to be used going forward to teach the without ever being dry. It is not an academic work, although it is an academic work.
Mhm.
It feels to me like I want to tell you the story of this great American treasure
Yeah.
who was who was probably one of the most famous writers of all time in
Mm.
American literature and American letters. But she also had a day job.
Yeah.
And she had kids,
Yeah.
and she made it work. You can make it work. So, can you just tell us a little bit? Because I laughed with Creole Feast because she had to figure out how to sell that book because she saw in the food of the culture a story.
Mhm. And what was also, I think, so relevant to this thread that I think you're pulling on so rightly, um, that kind of domesticated reality. Toni Morrison loved to cook. So she was trying out all of the recipes as well. So she's telling these professional chefs, hey, you might want to think about those bars because I did what you said in that recipe and it ain't fell apart. So there was also that element in there with the humor. And then there was this humanity that was there for her. So the idea for the book is there are chefs in New Orleans whose recipes have never been written down, that if we buy a recipe book from a famous restaurant in New Orleans, chances are the owner has written the recipe book and not the chefs themselves. And the owner has asked the chef, how do I make this? Or the owner has had a habit of making it, but the chef is really the one who adds the one or two extra things. So here's this authentic cookbook from 10 chefs at the best restaurants in all of New Orleans. But they also have the difficult reality of not having been paid above board for most of their career.
Mm.
So they don't have Social Security. They don't belong to a union. Essentially, they've been paid cash all of their lives. And there is someone who's working on organizing them to make sure that they can have some retirement and they can have like a good living. You think about the fact that these chefs, if they started even in the kitchen at 18, 15, 18 years old, and they're 55, 60 years old, sometimes older, they can't stand on their feet for the rest of their lives. So there's this advance, or the royalties for the cookbook, because the cookbook does very well, because she makes sure that the recipes make sense in addition to writing the narrative. Another thing that we see is an influence on her work, because she does drop little recipes in her
Well,
on.
it's one of the first cookbooks that's a narrative. It's
Yeah.
one of the first ever. And
And
now it's oft copied.
that's right.
Everybody copies her style on that.
Yep, you're
Mhm.
absolutely right. But she's figuring out, like, how do I tell the story of this cooking and make it become almost like cooking becoming an event? And the book does well. They're due royalties. Let's say they're due royalties in March, and she's asking for the money in January. And accounting is being pretty stiff about it. They're saying no royalty checks go out in March, and that's the end of it. And she says, listen, she goes down to accounting to say, the difference between getting their check now and later is the difference between their being able to organize so that they can retire with some dignity. So that's also an editor who's getting up from her desk. And this isn't just about the book, this is about the people as well. So she's a working class person, she's a domestic person, she's an artistic person, she's a person who likes beautiful craft and fine things, all kind of rolled up into one, and ultimately finds a way to have that cookbook do well and to have a life beyond the
Mhm.
release of it, because she also understood how books as events become a thing as well. So I admit, when I saw it, and then there were these promotional events going on around Valentine's Day in New York, where she was able to bring some of the chefs up, cook some of the dishes from Creole
Wow.
Feast, all promoted by like a liquor company, saying like, don't you want these pecan pralines from this recipe with this pecan pralines Jack Daniels whiskey, for instance? So
Isn't that fantastic? Because she was also prescient. She was ahead of the crowd with that, with sponsorship of the books,
that's
which
right.
is now where we're back to this now.
Yeah.
But she boldly, boldly, but she could have sold that book without that, but she knew she could sell it bigger, better. It would be better for the authors if she put it out in front and got behind it with sponsorships by the liquor company. I thought the whole thing was mad genius when I
Yeah.
read this, because it's like she didn't have to worry about that. She was already established. She was an incredible, she was a revered editor. Now every editor knows that every book they acquire doesn't necessarily sell in the time that the person's living or
Mhm.
in their youth. Sometimes it takes a few years for something to catch on. But I really believe that Creole Feast is the template, and that she was rolling the dice on her ideas about how do we get this in as many hands, as many readers as we can.
Yeah, she had figured it out with the Black Book as like
Mhm.
an event. Like, books have to be events.
Mhm.
And we saw that happening lightly here and there, but it was only happening with like an F. Scott Fitzgerald, or like a writer who had like 20 books already, um
Mhm.
or somebody who had like some celebrity status that they could build on. And she said, no, we can do this for an ordinary book and make it become a thing. And as you have so rightly said, like, understanding that you have to have an experience much more so than a book. Like, the
That's
whole
right.
experience of it has to ring true for people. It can't be fabricated, because people can see through that like immediately. So creating this kind of authentic experience for people to want to be a part of something
Mhm.
was, I think, a gift that she gave us as well.
She also broadened the lens of the kind of books we read
Yeah.
and the kind of books we sell, and especially widened the lens of the idea that black people don't read like white people read. Well,
Hmm.
we found out that's not true.
Yeah. The events experience of a book was out of that kind of necessity. Exactly, where she was frustrated by having to go to sales meeting and people saying like, I can't sell this book on both sides of the street, which for her was a very clear um euphemism in air quotes that
Mm-hmm.
I can't sell
Mm-hmm.
this to white audiences. And she's saying, all right, let me just do a book so that I can end this conversation because I don't want to have this conversation ever again. Let me end a book that does well. And at this point, in addition to like the 25-year edition reissue, I think the Black Book has gone in print as much, gone back into print, stayed in print, and has had more reprints than most books in the house. And that was a kind of prove my point that white people will buy books by Black people.
Absolutely. Can you tell the audience, because it's still, I think it still sells robustly, as you said, for
Yep.
sure. Can you tell folks what the Black Book is?
Yes, it's interesting that it's difficult to describe in the sense that it is essentially an exhibition. Imagine going to a museum, but it's between pages. The narrative thread really is epigraphs from poems and sayings at the top, but it chronicles Black life from the first iteration that we see it in the United States all the way to the contemporary moment. There are pictures of people's family members. There are bills of sale for enslaved persons. There are
Yes.
examples of the
Mhm.
different types of torture mechanisms that people had to undergo. But then there's also the Lindy Hop during the Harlem Renaissance. So it really is a kind of exhibition of Black life that was inspired in part by this notion of a record, needing to leave this record,
Mhm.
needing to share memorabilia, and the genius really of finding someone who could do it. Spike Harris was known all over New York as what they called him the Negro detective. If there was something that needed to be found of Black life, Spike Harris could find it. So she also understood, even as she had academic contacts, that she didn't need to go to someone with a PhD in history. She needed to go to Spike Harris because Spike had all of the memorabilia. But then she starts to put out calls. Anybody who has anything that you think should be useful
Mhm.
in the Black Book, because she also knew that everybody got somebody in their family who has every piece of everything that has ever experienced, been a part of that experience, sometimes much to our chagrin, where we're like, oh, please throw that away, except when it becomes valuable
That's right.
as the
That's right.
only one of something. So,
The overwhelming image to me, it was like an umbrella being opened, like you
yeah,
opened the scope, of what to learn how literature unfurled through the last century with her gentle guiding
yeah,
in her way at Random House. I mean, this was a passion for you to write this
it
book.
was.
I could tell you're just in love with her and this whole notion of the life that she led. Can you tell us why you were compelled to write this book?
Yeah, it's been a labor of love in every way, but like most good books, it took a lot of time, and I actually had to wait for the book to become what it needed to be. I went into the experience thinking I was going to write about Toni Morrison as an editor and as a writer in relation to the fiction that she edited. I had like a clear, this is what I'm doing. I'm talking about these like 8 or 9 writers. Initially, I thought it was like 6 or 7. And then I'm going to put her in conversation with the other fiction writers to try to figure out what this period is in African American fiction after 1970. Well, we were talking about Leon Forrest, Toni Morrison and I, at the Leon Forrest lecture not long after he had made his transition. And she says, kind of like, how did you come to Leon Forrest? Like, little girl, why do you know this? Because I was a young, fresh out of graduate school, but really excited about Leon Forrest. And his readership, she knew, wasn't what she thought it should be. And I said, well, I had taken this class where we looked at the writers that you edited at Random House, and her eyes kind of perked up, and she said, if I can do anything to help, let me know. Because that was such an important period in my life and such hard work, and nobody talks about it.
Wow.
And I thought, she's right that we don't talk about her as an editor. And I had to think about it as my own enlightenment moment of sorts, because in the seminar, I thought, like, hey, why did we choose these 6 authors? And Leon Forrest, Gail Jones, Tony K. Bombara, Henry Dumas, and John McCluskey, 5. And the person who taught the course, who was very close to Miss Morrison, just said very casually, "Oh, those are the writers that Toni edited when she was at Random House." And I thought, what? Toni Morrison was an editor at Random House?
See.
Yeah, it was like I had no idea. So then it became like the best rabbit hole ever that I just kept going down, down, down. And then there are these side conversations as you go down, and then you realize
Astonishing.
this. Yeah,
I feel like I learned a lot of secrets, and I
yeah.
was peeking in windows that I wouldn't peek in before, listening through doors, and just beautifully, you wrote it so beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
One final question. Now, back in the day, I worked on a show called A Different World,
Hmm.
and mentors Debbie Allen, Susan Fales Hill, great group of people. And so before I went out there, I said, "Listen, I went to a small women's college in Indiana, St. Mary's." And I said, "But I don't know. I was grew up in Virginia, which is why I was hired. But I said I really need to go to Spelman and Morehouse and down. I need to go to Atlanta before I come out to Hollywood to film the show." And they said, "All right, we'll send you." And they sent me down. And ever since then, uh, Dr. Williams Howard, I've been. A lot of people don't know what an HBCU is, a historically black college or university. Can you tell us why they are important and why they need our support?
Absolutely. Um, if you think about it from the perspective of just raw data, the largest number of African American professionals in any of the professions that you name all graduated from HBCUs in the largest number. I'm not saying that everybody did, but if you go to the profession of medicine, largest number of doctors, if you aggregate their data, it was like, oh, 76% of them went to an HBCU. If you do it for dentists, this percentage, which HBCU. If you look at PhDs, this percentage. College presidents, this percentage. So part of it is just the sheer volume. Like they're really important because we produce such an incredible
Mm-hmm.
um, professional,
Mm-hmm.
and you could say the same thing from, for the arts. Across the board, if you're thinking about
Mm-hmm.
people who are doing well and teaching us how to be human in the world in ways that are really special, there's that. The other part of it, so there, and a part of that is the nurturing and the kind of
Mm-hmm.
feel free. You're not working, you're not consumed by microaggressions. You get to actually just live and exist on your own terms. And the only thing that matters is your talent, nothing else. So you got to have good chops, right? Because you can't hide behind anything when you're in that space. But the other thing really is our approach to teaching, really having you think about things in ways that I think feed Toni Morrison. So part of the reason that I really spent a little time, and admittedly, I had to kind of shoehorn that biographical chapter in there because I was like
Sure.
insisting on we have to understand what her growing up was.
Yeah, it doesn't feel shoehorned. It feels like it's the platform upon which she's going to exalt herself because it was really important.
Yeah, it,
Yeah.
it was like that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding of how to understand voice, how to
Mm-hmm.
understand language and words, like comes as a function of her time, I think, at least in part, on the stage as an actress at Howard. Another part of Toni Morrison's life that we don't necessarily know a lot
It's
about.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
But it all makes sense, doesn't it? When
Yep.
she has to go out and sell a book, she's
Yep.
presentational. She knows how to
She's
do
a
it.
performer and she knows how to throw her voice. She knows how to really channel character. And she literally talked about like setting, thinking about setting. And so part of the HBCU connection to that is here, because we're resource strapped so often, you couldn't just be an actress. You had to sell tickets, you had to do promotions, you had to build a set, you had to understand lighting, you had to take elocution, you had to understand how to direct. You had, and that's that kind of Debbie Allen phenomenon as well. Like, girl, you don't get to do anything. And the classic kind of Debbie Allen moment is, I know your part and everybody else's. And that is like so fundamental to people at HBCUs because that is the expectation that
And
faculty.
I could tell you, having worked for Debbie Allen, that you didn't just go in and write your script and go home. You went to the sweetening, you went to the auditions, she taught us everything.
Yep.
You have to be able to do everything. And this was also true. Listen, in the women's college experience, there were women's HBCUs too,
Mhm.
where you are taught from the lens of your own magnificence. Can you tap who you are
Yep.
to move through this world and do the work you need to do? This is so important, and it is to be revered, supported, honored. It has changed the world. I mean, I think of the folks that went through
Yeah.
HBCUs, and I go, oh, Eddie S. Glaude Jr. went to Morehouse. I mean, he's one that comes to the top of my head because I had him on. Debbie Allen for sure, Felicia Ayers Allen.
Yep. Of course.
There's a whole thing here. There's a whole thing here,
Yep.
and we don't talk about it enough. I think it was helpful when A Different World was on, that it was in the forefront of conversation.
It
And
was. I'm a
it
college professor today in part because of A Different World. I'm not exaggerating. My parents had graduate degrees. Yes, that's true. But I knew I wanted to be on a college campus learning for the rest of my life. And if Dwayne Wayne could, like, I was like, how do I get to stay at Hillman for the rest of my life? Oh, all I got to do is be a professor? Okay.
it's really astonishing and
Yeah.
great. And I hear that a lot, and it makes me very happy because you know uh, I say this a lot on this podcast. You got two choices in this world: creativity or destruction.
Yeah.
You pick the one that is going to be the bouquet that keeps on living and
Hmm.
keeps on giving to people.
Hmm.
And I was thrilled to read your book. And I want everybody to read Tony at Random, The Iconic Writer's Legendary Editorship. And I thought, you know what else I love, Dr. Williams, is I love the use of the red pencil on the
Yeah.
cover.
Shout out to the design team. I
Shout out to the design team, and well, you know what? Let's mention them. Let's say a big round of applause for Sarah Kellogg at the Jacket Design, and our Dion Photos took your photograph, which is quite beautiful. But it's a gorgeous feast of a book,
thank you.
beautifully rendered and designed and beautifully written. And we want so many more from you, Dr. Williams. I know you're busy,
I'm working on it.
and we thank you for coming on.
Thank you.